On October 4, 2011, Cessna Caravan Golf Alpha Tango Victor departed Yellowknife, Northwest Territories with 3 passengers on board for a small indigenous settlement called Lutsel K'e. 26 nautical miles west of Lutsel K'e, the airplane flew into the side of a peninsula wall, killing the pilot and the passenger in the front seat. 2 passengers miraculously walked away. So much THC was found in the pilot's blood that the TSB thought it was a mistake. Hi, I'm Kivee, and this is your Bush Brief. Air Tindi has been a cornerstone of northern aviation for 37 years, having been founded on November 1st, 1988. What started as a small family-run floatplane business has grown into one of the most diverse and specialized fleets in the Canadian North. Operating out of its hub in Yellowknife, Air Tindi utilizes the Cessna 208B Grand Caravan as a workhorse for its regional scheduled services, providing a critical link to the remote communities of the Northwest Territories. The Caravan's reputation for reliability and efficiency makes it the ideal aircraft for daily passenger and freight runs to destinations like Lutsel K'e, Wekweti, and Gameti, where runways are often short and infrastructure is limited. Golf Alpha Tango Victor was a single-engine, turbine-powered Cessna 208B with a normal configuration of 9 passenger cabin seats. No terrain awareness and warning system was installed in Alpha Tango Victor, and at the time of the crash, it was not required by Transport Canada regulations. Avionics and flight apps have made huge advancements since 2011. While there were a lot of errors made to cause this crash, more situational awareness tools may have prevented it. While synthetic vision may not have been readily available in 2011, having airplanes, such as this one, equipped with more tools like synthetic vision or even ForeFlight would likely increase situational awareness and reduce controlled flight into terrain occurrences. The pilot was Matt Bromley. He went through Air Tindi's pilot-in-waiting program requiring newly licensed aviators to work the ramp before moving into the cockpit. This allowed the company to evaluate candidates while pilots gained essential operational knowledge. After mentoring as co-pilots on multi-engine aircraft, pilots transitioned to the Cessna 185 or 208 for VFR scheduled service. Matt progressed through this path, serving as a ramp attendant before logging 1,500 hours on the Twin Otter and 450 hours on the King Air 200 as a first officer. After completing training and line indoctrination on the Cessna Caravan in early 2011, he was fully qualified and certified for the flight. However, he did not pass a renewal Group 3 IFR check ride due to difficulties with the GPS and had to redo the check ride after additional training. Lots of pilots fail check rides. Failing a check ride doesn't mean you're a bad pilot. The region was dominated by a trough of warm air aloft, creating a typical low-ceiling, high-moisture environment with overcast cloud ranging from 2,000 feet up to 24,000 feet. Yellowknife was hovering right at VFR minimums with 3 miles visibility in light rain, mist, and a broken layer at 500 feet AGL. The en route environment was arguably worse, with patchy ceilings as low as 800 feet and localized visibilities down to 3 miles. Lutsel K'e was reporting a slightly better 10-mile visibility under a 1,500-foot overcast ceiling, but pilot reports confirmed a ragged ceiling between 1,000 and 1,200 feet ASL. Dangerously low considering the terrain sits around 700 to 1,000 feet ASL. The track from Yellowknife to Lutsel K'e crosses standard Canadian Shield terrain such as rolling rocky outcrops and dense timber with elevations ranging from 600 to 1,100 feet ASL. The Pehtei Peninsula, however, rises 500 feet off the surface of Great Slave Lake and sits almost perpendicular to the direct flight path. The impact data suggests a classic controlled flight into terrain profile. The initial strike occurred at 1,013 feet ASL, just 38 feet below the crest of the peninsula. Based on treetop strikes and ground scars, the aircraft was in a wings-level neutral pitch attitude at the moment of impact. He never saw it coming and was likely an IMC. The landing gear and cargo pod took the first hit on a 10-degree upslope, followed immediately by the prop. After the initial impact, The airframe became momentarily airborne again before coming to rest inverted nearly 500 feet down the eastern slope. The structural damage was catastrophic, the cockpit was crushed, and there was a complete failure of the forward cabin bulkhead. There were 4 people on board the aircraft: the pilot Matt Bromley, Tim Harris, Bernice Marlowe, and Sheldon Catholic. Tim Harris was sitting in the co-pilot seat. Both Matt and Tim were killed. Bernice and Sheldon survived. However, they were not found until roughly 3 hours after the crash, as the ELT became dislodged and didn't transmit a signal.
A man from Lutsel K'e, Northwest Territories, is getting a Governor General's Award for bravery. Sheldon Catholic is being honored for an heroic rescue in a plane crash that happened east of Yellowknife in 2011.
2.5 years ago, Catholic was heading from Yellowknife back to his fly-in community of Lutsel K'e. There were 4 people on board the small plane that rainy October day. The plane was flying too low and collided with a hillside about 40 kilometers west of Lutsel K'e.
I could hear her moaning and like just very painful. So that's how I knew she was alive.
Catholic had a shattered pelvis and a bone in his arm was exposed. He managed to haul Marlowe out of her seat and onto the wing of the plane by her clothes.
That's where my hand was starting to bleed out. So I grabbed my belt and I put it around my arm, tied that up, and then I kept on going because I thought it was going to blow.
The TSB investigation into the crash highlights a series of fatal deviations from safety protocols. On the day of the accident, the pilot's planning and decision-making were fundamentally inconsistent with company policy and safe flying practices. These errors included attempting a VFR flight in marginal weather, continuing into IMC while on a VFR flight plan, and flying over open water beyond gliding distance from the shore. Forensic toxicology might explain some of this. The analysis revealed 50.1 nanograms of active delta-9 THC in the pilot's blood. This is 10 times the established threshold for impairment. Because active THC levels this high typically indicate use within a 6-hour window, the evidence suggests the pilot was acutely intoxicated at the time of the flight. This wasn't a hangover from his days off. It was an active state of impairment that directly impacted his cognitive processes. The TSB concluded that being under the influence of cannabis likely altered the pilot's risk assessment. Specifically, he may have avoided the higher workload required for a formal IFR flight in poor weather, choosing instead to remain visual despite the deteriorating conditions. Ultimately, the report suggests that while the pilot was technically qualified, the psychoactive components in his system degraded his ability to safely manage the aircraft, leading to a fatal breakdown in judgment. On the morning of the accident, Matt's conduct on the initial leg from Fort Simpson to Yellowknife established a dangerous precedent of ignoring regulatory minimums. Despite weather reports indicating a 300-foot ceiling and restricted visibility, the pilot filed a VFR flight plan and proceeded to climb directly into the overcast layer. For the majority of that flight, the aircraft cruised at 3,900 feet above sea level, placing it well within Class E controlled airspace in IMC, where an IFR clearance is mandatory. This willingness to fly in IMC while on a VFR plan suggests a normalization of deviance that proved fatal later in the day during the transit to Lutsel K'e. When the aircraft departed for Lutsel K'e, the weather at Yellowknife was marginal, and the pilot again chose to remain visual rather than utilizing his IFR qualifications. It could not be determined why Matt chose to fly the trip under VFR. Conditions were suitable to enable operation under IFR at altitudes providing safe terrain clearance. The en route weather was suitable, and with the freezing level well above the minimum IFR route altitude. Matt had limited experience in single-pilot IFR operations. This may have led to reluctance to file an IFR flight plan on the accident flight, and the decision to remain visual in marginal VFR weather conditions. As the flight progressed toward the Pehtei Peninsula, Matt descended, likely to stay below a lowering ceiling and maintain ground contact. This seems to be a theme with CFIT accidents. Pilots continue to be pushed down by weather ceilings, eventually ending up in IMC. This is when Matt should have turned around. He had sufficient fuel. However, he did not have legal fuel for an IFR flight. The TSB estimates he had 760 pounds of fuel on board. This is 2 hours of fuel in the caravan. The direct track to Lutsel K'e takes about an hour. The TSB report does not state which GPS model was installed in the aircraft. However, it did not have a terrain awareness warning system. It was likely a Garmin 530 or similar, not a GTN 750, which I am using. The TSB noted that Matt transmitted a position report 6 miles ahead of his actual location, suggesting he mistakenly believed he had already cleared the peninsula and was over the open water of Great Slave Lake. Matt was ahead of the airplane, although to his detriment, a little too far ahead in this case. A primary factor in this catastrophic loss of situational awareness was the pilot's acute intoxication. Investigators concluded the marijuana was almost certainly consumed on the day of the flight. Ultimately, the TSB determined that the combination of acute THC impairment and the decision to push into marginal weather at low altitudes directly resulted in the pilot's inability to see and avoid the rising terrain. The message is pretty clear. Altered states as a result of drug or alcohol use can kill your passengers and you. I would say this pilot is in the vast minority of commercial pilots in terms of his consumption of cannabis. Situational awareness tools like synthetic vision and ForeFlight were just entering the market back in 2011. While there is no excuse for the normalization of deviance or for flying while intoxicated, these tools can save lives. They should be in every pilot's flight bag. Let me be clear, it was Matt's decisions that caused this fatal crash, not the lack of avionics. Air Tindi was in compliance. Aside from the fact he was high, what should Matt have done? He could have turned around and flown back to Yellowknife Airport. If the weather had become worse and he was unable to get back to Yellowknife VFR, Matt should have initiated a climb to the minimum IFR altitude, which is 3,000 feet in that sector, and subsequently called Edmonton Center asking for either a pop-up or an emergency IFR clearance to the point of origin or to the destination. He also should have filed IFR instead of VFR. Let's make sure we learn from this tragic event. The normalization of deviance is not cool, and it eventually proved fatal for Matt, one of his passengers, and seriously injured 2 more. Thanks for checking out my channel, The Bush Brief. Be sure to leave a comment and share your thoughts on this unnecessary crash. If you want more videos, like, share, and subscribe.